Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, researchers have found a way to tie your file sharing activities to your Skype account. We'll share the details on how this works and what you can do to prevent from being tracked. Plus, find out what happens when Chinese hackers take control of U.S. satellites, and we'll cover the ultimate way to host your own email. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. It's our 29th episode, and it was streamed live on October 27th for download on October 28th. My name is Chris, and joining me for all 29 weeks is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey Chris, everybody.
Hey man, welcome back to the show. You know, we're rounding that big milestone that I'm also about to round, and that's the big 3-0.
Yeah.
Although we're going to get to a little sooner in this show than I will, which is still a few months off. Alan,
that's a lot of episodes.
I know. Alan, I thought this morning that, we had a show. We thought we had a show for sure. The security news for this week is unbelievable. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, I wanted to mention our TechSNAP Reddit page because, as always, a lot of the content in this show does come from there. So we think it's only appropriate that we give you guys credit. And that's links.techsnap.tv. That's the subreddit where you can submit a story, vote on a story, comment. It helps us drive the content for the show, and also helps us know what you guys are interested in. And I wanted to suggest maybe a new possible use. I've been noticing in our live chat room that a few people have been telling us recently that they're looking for jobs. The TechSNAP audience is a bunch of really smart, intelligent people that are often in the IT field. So if you're in an IT field, some sort of technology field, and you're looking for great people, you could submit the link to your job posting in our TechSNAP subreddit. Boy, that's a lot to say. And then maybe some of our viewers might be able to find your job posting, and you might be able to put yourself together with an ideal candidate. I know that's a pretty long shot, but I know some of our viewers out there are looking for work, and I know some of you out there must have job postings that might fit. You might consider submitting those there. You never know. Maybe it'll work out for somebody. I hope it does. I'd love for TechSNAP to help somebody find a job. Yeah,
and when you're looking for that all-star person, especially in our industry where they're one all-star person can actually do the work of like 7 regular people. You really, sometimes the long shot is where you find those people.
Well, and there's a good chance that the person that's going to be viewing our subreddit and watching our show is a passionate person who really lives this stuff. And that's what you're going to want.
That's the difference between an all-star and a regular person, right? The regular person that does their job during the day and then switches off at night, that's not an all-star.
Absolutely.
The person that lives and breathes this stuff all day, every day, that's the person that is going to make the difference for your company.
Well put, sir. Well put. Now, of course, if you want to reach your message to any of those people, we also have ways to advertise on this show. I'm actively seeking advertisers. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/advertising, and I have details in there, as well as a form you can fill out to get a hold of us and get things rolling. There's also a fantastic audience for advertisers, so it's something to consider. All right, Alan, what do you say we move on and get into some of our news stories? Because I'm not even sure where to start with some of this stuff. It seems like a pile, but I like this first story you've picked out regarding the Chinese hackers and perhaps their attack on U.S. satellites. What's going on?
In the Economic and Security Review paper that the U.S. publishes with China every once in a while to kind of talk about their issues with each other, they noted that on 4 separate occasions during 2007 and 2008, U.S. satellites were hijacked by way of their ground control stations being hacked.
Oh my gosh. So they're like, hey, by the way, since we're talking about the issues that are important to us, we really didn't like it when you guys hacked our satellites.
So the satellites were, either not under the regular control or some other way disrupted for various periods, usually, 5 or 10 minutes, not that big of a deal, but it's an alarming capability for them to be proving that they have.
Yeah.
So one of the first affected satellites was Landsat 7, which is a terrain mapping and satellite photography satellite.
Wow. Okay.
And you have some example images there of what the stuff looks like. So the first one is a false color infrared image. It's just showing, heat being given off by different things. But that's a way to find stuff. If you see an empty field with a random heat signature, there's an underground bunker there and things like that. But more importantly is the second one here, which is showing a Landsat mosaic of the island of Hawaii. And it shows in full 3D detail all the terrain features.
Yeah, this is really impressive.
what a lot of people don't know is that U.S. guided missiles, the Tomahawk cruise missile, uses this type of information on top of GPS for guidance. So especially when GPS wasn't as reliable as it is now, and because GPS can be jammed, which we'll talk about in a minute, the missiles also have terrain following radar, where they will actually match up landmarks that they find, like hills, mountains, and valleys, and things like that, with the imagery they have of 3D models they have of the target.
That makes a lot of
sense. And they'll be able to follow and, like detour around a mountain, and because the idea with the Tomahawk is it comes in at a really low level, so that it's not detected on radar, and then it just pops up at the last second and explodes on the target.
Right.
And so these missiles rely on this terrain mapping information. And so even though it looks like a regular civilian satellite for satellite photography, like you see with Google Maps, the
data it provides is crucial.
Is it's actually of military value as well. The second satellite is just a climate and environmental monitoring satellite. Monitors things like climate change, pollution, and they get a bunch of pictures of it with the oil spill in the Gulf as well.
Oh, okay. I thought this is the one that monitored hurricanes and stuff like that.
It does. Yes, it does hurricanes and climate change and pollution. It's one satellite that has like 8 different modules that do different things.
Oh boy. That's a good one to go after. So is there any kind of repercussions for doing this? And do they know what the intentions were? Things like that?
So in the document, the U.S. doesn't directly accuse the Chinese government of anything in writing.
No.
But they do say that these types of actions are consistent with known war plans that involve disabling communications, command and control, and GPS satellites as a precursor to war.
Kind of testing to see if they have the capability of disrupting information services and things like that.
But maybe even at the same time, just subtly letting the U.S. know that, hey, we have this capability. Don't screw with us.
Oh, right. Right. And of course, you pick something that's semi-important, so it kind of really is important that you have that, but you didn't pick something that's like how the president gets emails updated on his BlackBerry level of criticalness.
You don't take out that, but you do,
just a shot across the bow, basically.
Kind of, yeah. So in the one incident with NASA's Terra AM1, that's the satellite, the environmental climate one, they say NASA's quoted as saying, the responsible party achieved all the steps required to command the satellite. So they could have repositioned it, made it ram another satellite, or turn off, or just fly into the atmosphere and burn up, or whatever. However, the attackers never actually took control of the satellite.
Doesn't it say here?
They could have, but they didn't.
And they did this. Am I right? They did this over the internet?
Yes.
They controlled satellites over the internet.
By hacking into the ground station that then controls the satellite.
Amazing that's even possible. That,
it is.
After everything we knew and all of the movies that we've seen, that at the end of the day, there's still an internet connection that comes into the building and is connected in some fashion to the equipment that is then connected to the stuff in space. Like they couldn't isolate that and not give it...
It might not actually be a direct internet connection, right? It might be private military internet that they got into some other way.
Well, just whatever it is, it's just astonishing.
Island hopping that we've talked about before.
Right.
You compromise one thing in order to get access to that ground station that's not on the internet, to get access to that satellite that's not on the internet, to screw with it. But what's another interesting thing is that not until the investigation about the 2008 incident did they even find out about the 2007 ones. So all the disruptions to the satellites in 2007, they didn't know that was because of hackers. And while they were investigating one that happened in 2008, they found out that the one in 2007 was related.
That's
amazing.
So
it raises questions about how reliant the U.S. military and other NATO members are on satellite communications and GPS and things of that nature.
Well, and if they're able to get in, and if they were in 2007 and they didn't find it until 2008, I guess this wouldn't necessarily be the case, but couldn't they also just hang out and just monitor and take a copy of data, or maybe even potentially inject data and make maybe then long-term projections or things like that wrong because of bogus data that essentially
or in this
hard
case,
to track back even
just monitoring what the U.S. is scanning with the Landscat. Where are they looking to fire their cruise missiles, right?
That's probably legitimately useful information, and really even if they just got that much data from this, they'd probably be satisfied.
Yeah.
Huh. Any other thoughts on this
But
one?
It just makes you wonder that does the higher tech military have at a disadvantage if all that technology suddenly gets shut off. Whereas, the Chinese military is more basic and doesn't have these capabilities, so they're not dependent on them. But if the U.S. military all of a sudden lost access to GPS because, all the satellites were jammed or taken down or whatever, then would they lose so much capability that they wouldn't be able to function properly?
It goes beyond just military uses for GPS. So if GPS had some sort of issue, like I was just listening to farmers talk about how heavily they rely on GPS to manage their farm equipment, and then map what areas of their farms yield the best crops and which areas are underperforming so they can budget correctly. I mean, the private sector has become so reliant on GPS for various different services that, the military definitely would have issues, but even just the commercial sector would be massively set back with GPS disruption. That's one of the problems LightSquared's facing right now.
Right. Well, actually, that came up recently in a recent NATO exercise off Scotland called Joint Warrior. The plan was that they would jam GPS around their ships in about a 20-mile radius around the battle group to simulate not having GPS.
How'd that go?
However, the jamming had to be suspended after pressure on the government over civilian safety concerns.
Yeah.
Fishing boats and other people that use GPS for every day and rely on it for safety and navigation were like, well, you're blocking our GPS. But apparently it was also screwing with some people's satellite TV in Scotland.
Oh, that's really what did it then, is that satellite TV thing. I guess the old compass and taking down notes trick might have to come back into a little bit of practice. Any other thoughts on this story?
Not really. That was about the extent of it.
All right. Well, I want to talk about something that you and I use on a weekly basis. We're using it right now, so you better not be pirating any software, Alan. And that's Skype. I guess somehow by monitoring Skype traffic, you can tell what people are downloading on BitTorrent. This is what the headline tells me. Is this true, Alan?
Basically, yes.
Oh, it is, huh?
Basically.
Awesome.
So researchers at New York University's Polytechnic Institute have developed a procedure which would allow them to determine if a certain Skype user is using BitTorrent to download anything.
Based on what?
Well, the first thing they do is look for Skype users and BitTorrent users that have the same IP address.
Okay.
Right. But that right there doesn't actually prove anything.
No.
Because of NAT and, if you're at a company that can be, or like at the college where I used to work, there would be like hundreds of people behind one IP address.
Right.
But they've actually come up with a way to determine if it's the same computer or not, even when it's behind NAT.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So it allows them to determine a strong correlation between a BitTorrent download and a specific Skype user. And a lot of people on Skype have their actual first name and last name and usually even what city they live in.
Yeah.
So importantly, unlike RIAA and MPAA lawsuits we've seen before that only considered the IP address and were constantly plagued by false positives.
Right.
Charging grandma when it was somebody else on the Wi-Fi or whatever. The researchers solved this issue by basically, so they go after the Skype ID and they send specially crafted packets that get Skype to either, if Skype's not behind NAT, it will send the IP address. And if it is, it'll actually get the Skype client to initiate a connection through one of the supernodes. So basically, they fake starting a call with you to find out your IP address. Now, Skype, as the user, you never see anything happening. You don't actually get a call, but Skype thinks you're about to, so it gives away your IP address.
And then they cut it off before a call actually is made or something.
Right. So that's a problem that Skype can fix. But anyway. That's
the question. Will Skype fix it, have they said?
Not yet. This is really still very new, but the research only came out a couple days ago.
Okay.
But basically by doing that, and then, so they got a list of all these Skype usernames and IP addresses, and then they went to the BitTorrent cloud, looked at the 50,000 most popular BitTorrent downloads, and started looking for those IP addresses. So that's when they have a suspected correlation, right? So two people on the same IP address, one on Skype, one on BitTorrent. Are they the same person? So what they do is they generate a response from each of those clients, right? So they send a message to Skype and a message to BitTorrent that gets a reply. And then by looking at the headers of the packets, they look at the IP ID, which is a field in the IP header that's like a sequence number for the packet, right? By default, your operating system, each packet is numbered so that they can be put back in order. And those numbers are sequential by default. So if you generate a response from the other computer using from two different services like Skype and BitTorrent, if they come back with ID numbers that are really close together, then that means they were very probably sent from the exact same computer. Whereas if the BitTorrent's on one computer and the Skype's on another, the IDs are going to be wildly different. And so you know, all right, that's a false positive. The Skype user and the BitTorrent user aren't the same person. But if the IP ID is the same, or not the same, it'll never be the same, but it'll be, if it's close enough together, then you know that those packets very probably came from exactly the same computer.
Skype has 560 million users, they mentioned in their report, so they figure there's a good chance that if you're a Skype user and you're online, you're also a pirate. You know, that they're going to, the two will, there's so many of both that there's a good chance you might be one of both, is what I mean.
Right. But just because you're using BitTorrent doesn't mean you're a pirate.
No,
right?
no,
if
absolutely.
You're downloading the Linux Action Show's Action Kubuntu virtual box, then you're not a pirate. But anyway, so the same technique could also be made to work with other VoIP applications, like they mentioned MSN or QQ or Google Talk, and other P2P applications like eMule or other file sharing applications.
Lovely.
But, you know, if you used a bunch of those things all together, it could gather enough evidence to conclusively prove a certain BitTorrent user's identity.
Well, Skype is owned by Microsoft now, and Microsoft owns the Better Business Bureau. What's it called? Not the Better Business Bureau, the Software Alliance, something or other, where their main focus is working with law enforcement agencies to crack down on software pirating and things like that. So that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Do you have any concern as a Skype user?
A little bit, but not so much because it's mitigated for me slightly.
How so?
So the one way to mitigate this is if your OS randomizes the IP ID numbers.
So like Windows 7 does, right?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, really?
However, my FreeBSD firewall does it for me.
I thought Windows 7 did. Wow, they should really
Windows
fix that.
XP, Vista, and Windows 7. Well, it's not a big deal, and actually, sometimes randomizing the ID confuses some firewalls.
True, but I have read too, and maybe this is a good chance to dispel this myth. But I have read that if an attacker can scan and can listen to the wire, and sniff the wire and figure out the order of your data packets, then they can also inject something by putting something in the next sequence into the wire. And that if you randomize, you avoid that. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems theoretically possible.
Right, but this is... The IP ID is only controlled on the out... Like, you only sign the outbound ones, not the inbound ones.
Okay.
Right, so you're setting the IP ID on the packets that are leaving your system.
So it would only be to the client that's receiving you that you might be able to trip up.
Yeah. And remember, these are different than the TCP sequence numbers, right? IP is a lower level.
Okay. Maybe that's probably what I'm mixing it up with.
Probably. But the sequence number in TCP is just for reconstruction, right? It's based on, it starts at 1 and it goes up based on how many bytes have been sent, right? So that you can reorder the packets. So FreeBSD has a sysctl called net.inet.ip.randomID, and it causes random IDs to be used. It's not on by default, but you can turn it on.
It's a pretty catchy name.
Yeah. And also the PF firewall used in pfSense and OpenBSD and so on.
Oh yeah, we've talked about that.
Can be installed on FreeBSD. At the firewall level, it has an option called scrub. When you can say scrub the random ID, and it will normally NAT doesn't change that IP ID number. Yeah. But you can have it randomize it as the packets pass through the firewall.
I see. Boy, another good reason to go with pfSense. Now, chat room saying, put this in the show notes. Of course, it's in the show notes.
It is in the show notes.
It's always in the show notes.
And specifically, this doesn't necessarily protect you. It just makes it harder to prove that Skype user and that BitTorrent user are the same person. But, if it's my internet connection and I'm the only one using it, then they don't need to prove that necessarily.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And, we've seen all of these, copyright infringement lawsuits happen plenty of times before without this level of evidence. So it doesn't necessarily mean they need that.
Usenet. Yeah. I'm just saying Usenet. Go get yourself a Usenet account if you so desperately need to pirate.
Though I just saw in on Slashdot that some British ISPs are being forced to block all of Usenet.
Although first rule of Usenet is don't talk about Usenet. So I didn't talk about. Yeah. I'll edit that out.
Right.
But boy, don't go after Usenet. That's the last hope for mankind. That's all I'm saying. Any other thoughts on the story?
But the discovery could be prevented by fixing the Skype client such that it will not reply with your IP address or cause you to initiate a connection if your privacy settings don't allow calls from that user. Right? Like I have my privacy settings saying I don't get calls unless you're on my friends list, but it allows the call setup packets to happen anyway.
So they must still, the client must do the call rejection instead of the Skype network.
Well, the Skype doesn't have a network. That's the problem with Skype.
Right. There's no central server.
Right. And so basically, too much happens. The client gives away too much information before it needs to. Mm-hmm. It should have, the other user should, say, I want to call you, here's my credentials, and then if those match your privacy settings, then send the information.
We're really getting to a point where there's a lot of different issues with Skype in terms of its limitations of technology and in terms with the quality ceiling that it seems to be reaching without proper advancement. And now being owned by Microsoft is sort of locked to a very major vendor. I know there's open source solutions out there, but none of them seem quite as good as Skype. Right. And I'd really like to see something come along that replaces Skype or at least gives it for a run for its money.
For Skype has right now where it just works for people that are behind NAT and so on.
And it also has a very good Skype out infrastructure with,
right. The relation calling with the actual pod system. But specifically with the way it does relaying in supernodes when two callers are both behind NAT where they normally wouldn't be able to connect to each other. The problem is that requires having these supernodes. And basically you just have to have a critical mass of users to be able to have certain people relay calls to certain other people.
Right.
And so any competing product would have this problem where it wouldn't be able to work until it had enough people, but it wouldn't have enough people until it worked.
Yep. It's a catch-22.
Right. And that's the other problem is that the only other solution to that is to have, hosted relay servers like MSN does. But the issue there is those cost money. Right?
Yep,
you're using up all this bandwidth, and if it's going to be an open source project, it's not necessarily going to have that.
Alan, you're making me cry. I would be happy with just some sort of small peer-to-peer, or I mean, not a peer-to-peer, point-to-point, where like you would dial in my IP, and I would. Logitech just bought a company a year ago that has a technology very similar to this, where it's you have to have the ports open on your firewall, but you dial somebody by typing in their IP and hitting enter, and it's a direct node-to-node connection.
Well, that might work well for us, but I don't know it would work well as a regular replacement for Skype.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
But yes, it would work well for us and probably slightly more reliably. Although we've got our Skype working just fine. But I remember the first couple times, sometimes we get a relayed connection that would cause us work it out, no end of grief.
Yeah. So I see we have another story here. Do you want to move on or do you want to cover anything?
Yeah, I just want to mention that the full research paper is linked in the show notes. It has a lot more detail.
And some graphs. They're small, but they're cool.
And because they were talking about, they did a sample of 100,000 users and they were only able to conclusively prove the correlation with about 400 of them. And they were, pretty close on like 700.
Really? That's it?
Well, they noticed that, they were just scanning all random Skype users and they found of the 560 million, on average, they only found about 10% of them to be online at once.
Now,
right, there are a lot of inactive Skype accounts.
That's a really interesting stat.
Like, if you look at the stats at the bottom of Skype, there are only 25 million people online right now, according to the status thing at the bottom of the Skype client. And so, that's 5% of the number of users they claim they have registered.
I kind of laugh at your comment that that we've come to a point now with online services where 25 million it has an only after it.
Yeah. But at the same time, that number is never accurate because of the P2P nature of the system.
It doesn't know itself exactly.
Right. And so that's how many people you and the nodes you're connected to have heard about from other nodes they're connected to. People are online.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, why don't we move on to the next story? You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. So this one's particularly interesting because it involves big money. The NASDAQ. And I guess there's, they call it like the NASDAQ, I forget, Dash or something like that. It's
Director's Desk.
The Director's Desk, where you can observe what's going on and all that kind of stuff, right? I picture one of those really fancy money-flowing displays and whatnot.
Well, basically, NASDAQ is a service company, right? They run the exchange, but they also sell software.
And it's been hacked, right?
Yeah. So the Director's Desk is a web application designed to allow executives at publicly traded companies to share sensitive documents and other information. Right? So it's kind of like a Google Docs for big money.
Oh, okay. Good. I like that.
Yeah. So when the NASDAQ was hacked back in February, they said, there's no evidence that any customer data has been stolen, blah, 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 blah.
Insert standard line we Googled and then pasted into this email here.
Well, it's the standard line that we talked about. When kernel.org got hacked, they said, it doesn't look like anything has been stolen or modified, but we're not going to assume that. We're going to investigate.
Is that what the NASDAQ is saying?
No.
Oh.
See, what NASDAQ and what Sony said when they got hacked is, we don't think anything was taken. It's like, yeah, but when you get hacked, you assumed everything was compromised until you can prove it wasn't, not the other way around. Or you assume everything was fine unless you can prove that it was stolen, right?
I like this story because they sprinkle in things like it was a blended attack, and they add these nice little flittering things to it to make it sound very, very cool.
Right. Well,
the media's having fun with these stories these days, I swear.
So the attackers, what they did is when they broke in, they implanted spyware into the director's desk application. And through that, were able to spy on the sensitive documents that were passed back and forth through the system by publicly traded companies.
Wow.
So these are, things that would affect the stock price of companies if they got out into the news. And so it could have allowed the attackers to do insider trading and make a lot of money by being able to predict, all right, there's bad news about this stock coming up, so we want to, put orders on it. Or, there's good news for this company, their stock's just going to shoot up, so let's buy a bunch of it and then sell when it shoots up.
What an interesting idea. The way you support further online hacktivism is maybe by hacking Wall Street itself and playing the stock market based on the information you find out, and then you turn that money around and you fund things like Anonymous or whatever it might be.
Could be, yeah.
Could be a way to generate a little revenue.
And then they said, again, this was an example of an advanced persistent threat and also that blended attack you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
As we saw with the RSA attack, remember they did a lot of work to break into RSA. But in the end, the RSA hack wasn't about hacking RSA.
Right.
And then with the South Korea telecom hack, again, what they did is they wanted to break into South Korea telecom, but instead of trying to hack them, they hacked a company that provides software to South Korea telecom and hacked their update server. And so where the attackers went after a service provider, in this case NASDAQ, in order to compromise the ultimate target, which was the publicly traded companies and their sensitive documents.
Mm-hmm.
Right? With RSA, the ultimate target turned out to be Lockheed Martin, the arms manufacturer. And with South Korea telecom, the target the place they hacked into was AI Zip or something like that. It was some little, utility company.
It didn't matter though because they had that update server. It didn't matter.
Right. And so they actually, to get into South Korea telecom, they hacked some other little software company. And in this case, they hacked NASDAQ in order to get at the sensitive documents that weren't actually NASDAQ's documents.
Mm-hmm. You've also heard of like military leaks in the past where a contractor's security has been compromised. So it goes back, it's a form of island hopping. It's also the number one creed that I think a lot of serious attackers do. They refer to it as an advanced persistent attack, but what it really means is I get in, and at any level I get in at, I hang tight, and I observe, and I collect more data, and I advance forward.
Yep.
That's the advanced persistent attack, where you kind of lay low. I think to frame it as this was an advanced persistent attack, so it's extra bad, actually is a little disingenuous, though, because I think all attacks that are legit, that are real, are going to be of that nature for the most part. And I think maybe they kind of hype it up a little bit by calling it that. Because they're all going to be that.
It means this was a real hack, not a script kiddie, is all it means.
Right. This was somebody that really knew what they were doing, and they needed to go about it in a way that would get them access. And so that's how you do it. And I think we have seen that with almost all the stories we've covered, and I think we'll continue to see it. The question is...
it's not an excuse. Because it was an advanced persistent threat doesn't mean you couldn't stop it. It just means you would have had to try.
That's exactly it, Alan. You nailed it. The question is, are they just using it as what could we do? It was advanced, and it was persistent. That should make it more detectable. You know what I mean? Like, there's really, it's just becoming a corporate excuse. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll put security procedures in place now, so hopefully the next advanced persistent threat we'll be able to detect. No, you need to do this stuff now. You need to patch your stuff now. You need to put intrusion detection in place now.
Yes, we didn't the story never mentions whether Director's Desk had any kind of encryption for the files that were being passed through it or stored in it.
That'd be interesting.
I don't know if any files are actually stored in it, but it seems like it was. And so, yes, obviously these files weren't encrypted or something, so that somebody at NASDAQ obviously would have been able to read these documents if somebody could have modified the system so the system could leak the documents. Right. Whereas if they had end-to-end encryption so that the service provider, NASDAQ, or anybody snooping in the middle wouldn't have been able to read the documents if they're encrypted, then they wouldn't have had this problem.
They wouldn't have gotten anything in the first place.
Right. And it seems like this is, made to be idiot-proof because it's for high-level executives, right?
It just seems like too often when they have these compromises, once the attacker gets in, it's like they have the keys to the entire candy shop, and there's not a layered approach to security where back-end services have additional layers of protection. I mean, look at this satellite story. You're probably right, Alan. I mean, we don't really know how the Chinese attackers went from the internet to actually controlling a satellite, but to me, it seems like there must have been a breakdown of a layered security approach, right? That something didn't work in their approach. Same thing here now, and it's a lot of it can be attributed to shoddy IT craftsmanship in a way.
Yeah, but so the application was lacked a number of important security measures, like some kind of end-to-end encryption, but also, like you were saying, an intrusion detection system, right? If you use something like Tripwire or anything to that effect, where it will detect modifications to files that shouldn't have changed, right? Director's Desk files for a web service, like other than when they upgrade a version of it, those files shouldn't be changing. If all of a sudden the files in your application are changed and you didn't do it, well, somebody did, and that's probably not a good thing.
I agree. Any other thoughts on this story?
Not really. Just all right. Well, they should have an intrusion detection system.
This last story sort of dovetails in perfectly when a company comes along and gets their stuff flowing all over the internet about what's happening, about how they've been attacked or whatever, etc. I think we probably would all agree those are generally likely the rare cases, and a lot of times companies that get hacked and attacked and have data breaches never even tell people, because why would you unless you had to? Well, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, is trying to make, at least when it comes to financial reporting and filing, a change to this. You want to cover this story, Al?
Right. So the SEC says they may want companies to disclose cyber attacks as part of their regulatory filings.
Yeah, like if they had to take some sort of major loss or had some sort of lawsuit. Well, now if they get attacked, they need to say it. They need to tell investors.
Yes, because if you're an investor in that company, you need to know things like are they being hacked on a regular basis and totally screwed over? Then maybe I want to invest in a company that's a little better, or maybe I want to change the CEO of the company to someone that's going to take care of the problem instead of sweep it under the rug.
Right. Yeah, they're about to have some sort of major announcement about an attack, and so their stock plummet is about to price, or the stock price is about to plummet, and these kinds of things would be good to know when you're putting money into the company.
Right. And again, this is separate from regular government policies about, when you get compromised, you have to tell the customers. A lot of states don't actually have rules like that yet. Like some places like Massachusetts do, where if a company from there is hacked, they have to inform their customers and provide them with identity theft protection for a year. But a lot of places don't. And so the company, loses your data and they don't even have to tell you that it was lost.
Right.
Let alone, provide you some assistance.
And some places, depending on the nature of the attack, some states have local laws that the company has to follow, but they don't necessarily have to follow it outside that state. And of course, when you're in Canada, like you, Alan, they don't maybe have to tell you anything at all if they don't want to.
Right.
So
Canada in this example has stronger laws because Sony got in trouble because they took too long to tell the Canadian government about their compromise.
Well, now, and also, if they had to make these disclosures, then it's possible that what they would find is people would vote with their dollar and they would stop investing in these companies. And it might be a way by leading companies with their paycheck, with their paybook, to get them to invest more in securities. So the SEC might end up being successful in improving the situation we're in, just because the number one things companies respond to is revenue and losses and investments and things like that.
Right.
I found, though, reading through this, and of course the link to the whole thing's in the show notes, but I found that the wording from the SEC seemed a little weak. Like it was sort of more optional on the company's behalf.
It is, with the government, you tend to find that, there's all these little loopholes about, well, if you can't do that, or you should do this, and you might want you to do this. And,
right.
But, with big companies, it's hard to make them, change a policy or be agile in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's probably something that would take a while to come into effect, but the sooner we start, the sooner that it would come into full effect.
Yeah, it's true. And I can always make improvements. Any other thoughts on this one?
Just short list. Some of the potential items companies may have to disclose are aspects of the business and operation that give rise to cybersecurity risks. So what are they doing that makes them at risk?
We have a website and a database.
Well, the extent of outsourced functions that have material cybersecurity risks.
I like that one. So who are you contracting with and what are they doing?
Yeah.
And how does that impact your security?
Do they have and so on.
I like that one.
Because again, that's what we were talking about is where, where a contractor gets hacked and it's like, so it wasn't our fault, but it's like, yeah, but you hired the contractor. You had some due diligence to make sure the contractor was keeping your data safe.
Doing that due diligence, forcing them to do that due diligence will keep them protected and safe.
Yeah, especially when they're outsourcing to foreign countries that maybe have weaker data protection laws.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there, it seems I'm getting wafts of heavy-handedness with government getting involved in business, and I'm picturing like how IT departments might have to structure themselves to accommodate some of this stuff. But at the same time, the consumer side of me over here is thinking we're just getting our butts handed to us with all these different breaches, and we need somebody to step in and protect us. That's my thought.
Right, and so most importantly would be the description of all cyber incidents experienced by the registrant, that is the company, that are individually or in the aggregate material to the company. So anything that caused them to have costs or consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, a cyber attack technically could be, the people trying to brute force your SSH server. But you install, fail to ban or deny host or whatever, and it blocks it, then there's no cost or consequence there. So you don't have to, write about every single port scan done on your servers ever. But if something happens, you get broke into and it costs you this much to make it up to your customers or whatever, then that needs to be reported. Right? Rather than sometimes we're hearing rumors of companies being hacked and their data is being stolen and then it's being ransomed back to them in exchange for piles of money. Well, that wouldn't be able to happen secretly anymore.
Right.
And I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah. I'm hopeful to see where this goes. Like I said, it seems a little light.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a good step in the right direction.
Right. And like you're saying, I think the idea here was the SEC didn't want to be too heavy-handed, and the government doesn't want to be dictating how companies structure their IT departments. But at the same time, they can't just not deal with these issues.
Right. Chat room's laughing at your comment called port knocking. Come on, you guys heard of that? Port knocking, right? All right. Anything else before we move on?
No.
All right. Well, normally we would jump over to the feedback section, but I have one quick thing I want to address before we go on. And I'm making this announcements on all our shows for the next couple of weeks because it's big changes in next week. So this comes out tomorrow. So the day after the next week's episode, the day after episode 30 will be my last day contracting, at least for now. And I'm taking Jupiter Broadcasting full time. I'm actually making the transition. And so along with that, we're looking for ways to raise revenue. We do have the jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate. If you love our shows and our content and want to support us that way, there's a couple of monthly plans there that help a lot and aren't very expensive. Also, though, if you want to get yourself a little something, I want to recommend an Audible book. Now, you have to get this link through our show notes for us to get credit, but it's Ready Player One, and it's an Audible book read by Will Wheaton, and boy, is it fantastic. I'll give you the brief of it. Will Wheaton lives in like this dystopian future, this 30 or so years in the future. The economy's collapsed, things suck, but one developer who loves the 80s has created this MMO called the Oasis. And this massive, it's like Second Life, but taken to a whole other degree that everyone goes in and everyone lives in because, well, the real world sucks. And Will Wheaton reads the part. He narrates the whole box, but he reads the main character of a kid who grows up and learns how to fix computers and repair Oasis terminals so that way he can fix and go get logged in. But the developer of this MMO dies, and this guy loved the 80s, so he built this whole MMO with references to the 80s, shows, music, games, computers, tons of 80s and 90s references throughout that make you laugh constantly. And what happens is as this MMO developer dies, he leaves this huge sum of money in the game locked behind an Easter egg. and it becomes an Easter egg hunt with tons of great trivia. And Will Wheaton has a blast reading it. It's called Ready Player One. We have a link in the show notes. You do have to use our link for us to get credit. And when you get there, you can either get the book. It's on sale right now. They have a Halloween sale. Or you can subscribe. We get the biggest kickback from a subscription, obviously. But if you buy the book, we also get a little piece of that too. Yep. So link to that. Go check that out. That's my plug as we begin to generate revenue. But we'll see where it goes from there.
There's also a 30-day free trial of the subscription.
Yeah. And we get a kickback even if you just try the trial, which is awesome. I personally have used Audible for, well, I don't remember when they launched it, but the day Audible launched their mobile apps, which are awesome. They give you like stats, how long you've listened, different genres, and they give you badges and unlocks and all this kind of stuff. Works great on my Galaxy Tab, which has become like my reading machine. I love their apps. You can buy the books on their site and then just go to the app and download it right there. And you can download it in advanced quality. It's good stuff. So check it out. And that's audible.com. Link at the top of the show notes for episode 29 of TechSNAP if you'd like to support the show. All right, Alan, with all that said.
I'm a big fan of audiobooks for a long time. And so Audible was awesome.
Yep. As we go forward, I'll probably do a pick or so every now and then and tell you guys when
I might have a good one for us too next week.
Yes, we do. But Ready Player One might be one of the best books I've read in 5 years. And when I grabbed the audio version, being read by Will Wheaton is a treat because Will gets all of the references and you can hear it in his voice. And so it makes them that much more enjoyable because you get them and the author gets them and you're both kind of silently going, yeah, that's funny to yourself as he's reading it. So great book. All right, Alan, with all of that plugging done, let's move on to the TechSNAP feedback. All right, Alan, that music means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback segment. Now, of course, you can always send your email to feedback at TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com, right? Is that and then, of course, there's also the Reddit page. Our first question today, and actually we're only going to do one question today, comes from what he claims himself as to be the #1 fan. So I want to do special care here to try to get his name right. Even though he's from Denmark, I'm going to give it a shot. And it's Jacob Lewitsen. Jacob Lewinson. I'm sorry, Jacob, if I got that wrong. But his question is as follows. He says, as you see, I'm writing this from my Gmail account. Google is awesome, and I use the heck out of their services. Yeah, I know that one. But email is such a basic, important, and sensitive component of one's digital experience that I want to own my own emails, he says. And I totally know what he means. He says, I've heard last talk about RoundCube, which is a pretty good webmail client, very Web 2.0-ish with some
it's kind of the closest webmail to Gmail.
That you can load on your own server.
That you would run on your own server, yeah.
Yeah. He says, so he has a server. It's Ubuntu Server 10.4, which is their LTS release, and he's got it running on an Atom box, just like my Bitcoin mining rig. He has it run 24/7. He even registered his own domain name using our Linux GoDaddy code for the Linux Action Show. Thank you, sir. And he has it pointed to his static IP. Ooh, he has a static IP at home. That's nice. At least I assume he's at home. He says, so my question is it possible to make my Ubuntu server an email server and put the RoundCube interface on that same machine so that I can access my email from the web just like I do with Gmail now? And how would you recommend I do that? He says, do I have to purchase email services from GoDaddy or is just a domain name enough? Will my computer handle it? He said it would be fantastic to get a kind of an all-inclusive explanation of how to do this. And he says, thanks for all the amazing work. He says he loves just about every show we produce. Just about. I don't know exactly what that means.
That is supposed to mean, but
so we thought this is actually probably a question that a lot of people have is how best to own your own email so you're not having it sit, because all of these terms of services for Hotmail or Yahoo Mail or Gmail, they all state that the service provider fully owns your email. Anything that's in there, they can read, they can access, and they can index.
We talked about a couple weeks ago with Gmail handing over emails under a subpoena.
Yeah.
Whereas if you provide your own email service, you might be able to, use your Fifth Amendment rights to not incriminate yourself or something to not hand that over.
Well, you can also have your own email retention policy. And this is completely legal, is you can say, well, I'm sorry, but my email retention policy is only 24 hours. After that, it's permanently deleted from my server.
Right.
Whereas Google doesn't have that retention policy. So when it's subpoenaed, they legitimately have to, by law, provide the information.
Exactly.
He was kind of sounding like he was hot to trot to set up his own email server at his house. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is possible. Depending on policies at your ISP, it's not necessarily a great idea.
Right. Like I've heard Comcast throughout.
Almost every home ISP will block port 25 both inbound and outbound.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll notice that sometimes even if you're trying to set up like your work email at home, you have to use an alternate port. Yeah. And that is because they don't want virus-infected computers sending spam.
And like on my connection, I believe 443 is blocked inbound, so I can't HTTPS to anything at my house, which kind of sucks.
Right. They want to prevent you from running servers at your house without paying for a really expensive business connection or server connection. So they block ports like FTP, port 80 and 443, so you can't run a web server out of your house.
Because you have to have that special business data. The kind of internet that's for business. That you have
the one that costs extra and doesn't actually give you anything different.
Maybe it's better support. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I guess we're both saying it's possible. The other thing I find is it kind of is the lowest hanging fruit in terms of like script kiddies that do scans of ports and see what's available and see what they can go knock on. So if you have SMTP open and web, which we would have to have open in order to Roundcube, you're sort of inviting a lot into your home network potentially. Something else to consider. Now you can do it.
And you included some links in the show notes.
Yeah, I included. Now, he mentioned he was running Ubuntu long-term support, so I included 2 links that will walk you through how to set up Ubuntu into a mail server. You mentioned you have a static address. That's good. When you're setting up your domain name that you already have, you just need to add what's called reverse DNS, right, Alan? So that way when he's sending email, people can look up and see that he's legitimately who he is and things like that.
Well, the thing is he won't control his reverse DNS. That'll be done at his ISP.
But it's a static,
it's
you're
static,
right. Yeah,
it'll still be done by that, but it'll likely be, something dot his ISP dot whatever, and so it'll be okay. But he'll need to set up what's called an MX record or mail exchanger. So in GoDaddy or wherever he hosts his DNS, if he does that himself or whatever, he'll have to add a mail exchanger record saying that my mail server is this hostname, and that hostname will point to his IP address.
Right.
And then that's where mail will be diverted.
There's also something called an SPF record that he should probably look into setting up. But I kind of thought, why not compromise? Why not use... So GoDaddy has... He's already got the GoDaddy domain. GoDaddy has an email forwarding service where you can set everything up to go to GoDaddy's server, and then they will forward all of that off to just one server that you want. So you could have everybody and everything flow to GoDaddy, and then GoDaddy will redirect to you, and then you could lock it down so that only GoDaddy's IP address can send email to your server. So then you don't have to worry about script kiddies scanning you. And you also don't have to worry so much about your ISP blocking it because they're not going to block GoDaddy. And you could probably run the port that GoDaddy sends it to on any port. So that might be a good way to go too.
And at the same time, even if you want to control the domain, but you can still have it forward to your Gmail if you're not worried about your actual email being seized. You just want to make sure that you have control over the domain.
And one route that we've done is Jupiter Broadcasting uses Google Apps for our email. And I figured, so people email me, chris@jupiterbroadcasting.com. That just goes to what is essentially a privatized version of Gmail. And the reason why I do that is because at any point, I could take my domain name and my MX records and point them to anything else. It doesn't have to be Google. So as long as I have people emailing my domain name and I control the DNS records for that domain name, I can determine where it goes.
You have the freedom to choose to go somewhere else.
Right.
And whereas if you use, Jupiter Broadcasting at gmail.com, you wouldn't have that freedom. And so that's why it's great to have your own domain name.
It's good, like if you just have a Comcast or an ISP account and you want to change ISPs too.
Right, because that's why I eventually got my own domain. Was, I went through a couple different ISPs and then I had like a mail.com account, but it looked silly after a while. And so it just looked a lot more professional to have my own domain name. And I knew that would follow me wherever I went on the internet.
You can also, and a lot of different hosting providers will do this. Since you're already a GoDaddy customer, you can also look at their hosted exchange. I don't know. I think it's like $8 a month or something like that. It might even be cheaper. And that's a full-fledged calendar sync, email sync.
I think they also have just a regular plain email service as well.
Yeah, for cheaper. Yep. I just think it's kind of fancy if you use their hosted exchange, then you get the advantages, you get the features of Exchange without having to run your own Exchange server.
Exactly.
Like full push notifications to your phone and full calendar integration.
Calendar
and
inviting and just sharing stuff with other people.
Yeah.
So if you're used to that corporate feel for your email, then you can have that even for your own personal domain.
Yeah, which is kind of fun. You feel like a big shot. Like you got all this. The Google apps also offer all that. The Google Calendar and all that stuff's all integrated in.
We use that for some stuff at our company, but our main one is our own separate IMAP server.
Yeah.
So there are some caveats to doing this yourself.
Yeah.
The first thing is, of course, if you're going to use your own domain name, you have to remember to renew your domain name. Otherwise, your email stops working.
He's talking to me, everyone. Yes. He's talking to me there.
Just ask Chris about that one. But no, it's happened to me once before as well.
Yeah, it's happened to Jupiter Broadcasting twice now.
Yeah. And so just, or even like if you're running your own mail server, if for whatever reason you're down and you try to like contact your customers are trying to contact you to ask you what's going on, but your email is down too, so you can't respond.
That's why I like having it at like a hosting provider, because they very rarely go down, and your home internet connection or your power or whatever it is can go out, and then you don't have email.
Right. So you also have to be very careful about where you host your domain, right? If you pick like a less reputable service, then for either your website hosting, even if you're using something else for your email, or the email hosting, your domain can end up being blacklisted because you're related to IPs that are known to be related to spammers. Yeah.
That's why those reverse lookup records and SPF stuff are important if you do have it go to your own house, because you'll probably very quickly get labeled a spammer if you don't have those, and it's pretty hard to get out. They all share those databases. Once you're blacklisted, it floats around the net.
But the same thing happened to me as the one place where I was hosting one of my domain names got blacklisted for being involved in some Ukrainian scam with fake pharmaceuticals or something.
Oh, no kidding.
And so that resulted in my domain name being added to the blacklist, and I couldn't send email to a number of different places.
I had that happen to a doctor's client of mine, and they were legit. They weren't actually spamming, but they got marked as spam, and it was a massive uphill battle.
Yeah, and so I got my domain unblacklisted by moving away from that range of IP addresses, but it can happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like you mentioned, the biggest problem with hosting your own email, like at home, is that you have to keep that server up 24/7. Otherwise, your email doesn't work. Right? The email server has to be up when somebody's trying to send you an email. Otherwise, you don't get the email. Now, a lot of places will retry, but you don't want to count on that because some places won't.
Yeah. Yeah. It depends on each mail server's config if they're going to resend. Yeah.
For example, like PayPal, they're not great at resending the notification emails they send.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the high volume guys actually are pretty bad about it because they have such a high volume.
Right. And so they're like,
Screw
one
you.
Attempt and that's it. Or maybe a second, but that's it.
Yeah.
And you also need to have a reasonably static IP address because you don't want the mail trying to connect to the IP address once you've moved to a different one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you have a non-static IP address, it can be an issue. And also, if you're going to host at home, I highly recommend that you get a backup MX service.
Oh,
so
interesting.
That's, normally when you set up those mail records, that MX record I talked about that specify who's in charge of your email, you can specify multiple host names with a preference order.
Yeah.
And so you always want to make sure you have more than one so that even if you have like a dedicated server or a VPS or something for your email, or if you're rebooting it for 5 minutes, it's down.
Mm-hmm. There's services like Postini that's now owned by Google that they're a spam filter, and they're actually pretty great. I have a few years of experience with them. And if you relay your mail through them, that's what you point your MX records to. They handle all that stuff. And if you go down, they auto-queue your email, and then when you come back up, they auto-deliver the email, which is nice.
Yes. So there's a lot of places that offer services like that, like DNSMadeEasy.com.
Yeah.
I think even Dyn DNS offers something like that.
Yep. I've just used Postini, but you've used DNS Made Easy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a bunch of similar places that offer backup MX. And like honestly, I just have friends where I'm backup for their domains and they're backup for my domains.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Right. And so basically what they do is they collect email that sent when your server's offline and then forward it back to your server once it comes back up. Because normally email is the most critical service on your server.
It really is. It's funny.
Because, even if your server's all about the website, it's like if you don't get your email, that screws everything up.
It's as bad as not having your phones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but the major issue with doing it at home is that the ISPs block port 25 internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're just never going to be able to send and receive that email very well. Even if they don't, a lot of the IP ranges, specifically ones that are dynamic, but basically the IP ranges of like regular home cable connections and DSL connections are all blacklisted because there shouldn't be mail servers there.
What about something like Dynamic DNS's port hopping that they'll offer, where you have the email go to Dynamic DNS, and then they'll flip it down to your server on any port you want. So if your ISP is blocking 25, you could put it on something like 3,000.
Right. Then yes, you can do that. And again, they would also be providing you with that
queuing.
The queuing, the store and forward.
Yeah.
Where they would hold on to the email when you're not online, or, if you have a dynamic IP address, when you get disconnected and you're reconnecting and getting a new IP address, then you need them to be holding the email during that time. So yes, there are ways to do it, although, in the end, it's better to have someone that specializes in email, because your email is very important. You don't want to be missing some of your emails.
And you don't want to keep telling people, all right, email me here now. All right, I've moved over here, because you just kind of seem like a flake. You could do, of course, if you own your own domain, that makes it a little easier because you can at least repoint where it goes. What about, here's an idea. Amazon offers that like free EC2 server for a year or whatever. You could, if you really wanted to be hardcore and you wanted your own server, you could use that free Amazon EC2 instance.
Those ones only include a NAT IP, not an external IP. And you have to pay for an IP address. Although it's very cheap. You can do it for a couple $.
But you're probably right, yeah.
But yes, that is an option as well.
That might be a fun way to get to experiment with a full Linux server where you have full run of the box, and then but also get your email that's not hosted at your house.
But yeah, actually, that Amazon EC2's free tiny instance for a year is actually a cool thing if you want to play with it.
Yeah. Plus, they'll get like you can just select like a pre-installed Ubuntu box. You can get rolling kind of fast. Or I think there's even a way to take your existing 1004 box that you have and migrate that up to EC2.
Yep, and Colin Percival has been working with Amazon to get FreeBSD running in EC2 instances. I don't think it works in the tiny ones yet, but some of the other main ones it's working reliably now.
So would you consider using something like that if you needed some fast scale? Like if you're like, oh crap, we need to add 30 more servers?
Yes, except for our the amount we charge for bandwidth is less than Amazon charges, so it wouldn't work very well for Scale Engine.
Yeah, you take a loss there. Yeah.
But yes, we've used them for things like that before when we needed CPU power randomly in a hurry.
So I think we're both saying, you can host email at home, but from personal experience over the years, it's just become more, it's less of an uphill battle if you just host it somewhere else these days.
Yeah.
Because people are so worried, ISPs are so worried about you becoming a spam relay that they've really made it kind of difficult.
Yeah. And, even if your ISP isn't blocking it, the person receiving the email may be blocking large ranges from regular ISPs like Comcast. Now, that's why Comcast business lines are in a separate IP address block.
Right.
And they're like ComcastBusiness.net or something like that, specifically because the regular Comcast addresses are all blacklisted, so they can't send emails.
Yeah. There you have it. Any other thoughts we should touch on this? I'm trying to think if there is anything else. I would say check out those how-tos that I linked in the show notes. If those don't look like they're too much for you, take a stab at it and see how it works for you. You can always just kind of start and poke around.
Set it up. Yeah. But I wouldn't use it for your main email very much.
Probably not. I would tend to agree.
But, that's our home server segment on hosting your own email.
There you have it. All right, everyone. Well, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And that music means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Now, the Roundup on TechSNAP is stories that either we didn't want to dive into in the main story for whatever reason, maybe we didn't have enough details or whatever, or things we thought you'd want to read up on in the links in the show notes, and almost all of them have been submitted by our TechSNAP subreddit, so thank you to everyone in there who's done that. All right, Alan, let's cover the first story this week because it makes me want to pack up, put a warm jacket on, and move up north. Facebook is building a server farm on the edge of the Arctic Circle.
Yep.
Now, we've talked about, it is pretty cool looking, isn't it? We've talked about Facebook's efforts in the past to make a very efficient data center. They're right up there with Google in that. And now also Apple has announced they're going to build a huge solar farm for their data center, but Facebook's taking a different route. They're building it up in the cold, and they're actually going to use the outdoor air to cool the server farm.
Right. Cooling is one of the most expensive parts of running a data center.
They still expect to spend a ton of power on this thing, but you're totally...
Yeah. And at the same time, it's an advantage to building your data center in Canada versus California, is that here for 6 months of the year, you don't need to spend as much on cooling.
Yeah, it's going to be like 11 football fields in size. So it's going to be
huge.
Like 3 buildings worth of servers that are just going to sit there and melt snow.
Yeah. I'm a little interested in how they're going to run the internet connection up there. Like if you want diverse fiber routes and everything, it's like there's not that much infrastructure up there. Even for electricity. Like sometimes it's kind of unreliable up there. They would have to It's a little harder to get, diverse routes for internet and power and, any other infrastructure stuff they need. Like if they're doing chilled water cooling or something, then they need sources of fresh water. And then at the same time, it's like, how do you deal with the people that are going to be working up there? Now, IT people do tend to be the kind of people that wouldn't mind just living on a server farm.
That's me.
Yeah, same here. But regular people might have get into the point of like cabin fever if you made them live way up north and do nothing.
I think it sounds wonderful, to be honest.
Exactly.
With you. Yeah.
For me, it'd be great, but for regular people, it might be an issue.
I could see that. I could totally see that. All right, well, let's move on to the next story in the roundup. This one I'll let you take, Alan. It's Japanese Parliament hit by a cyber attack.
Yes, the Japanese Parliament was hit by a cyber attack, and
This again sounds like one of those Trojan got on the PC, got them the info they needed, stole the username and passwords. I mean, it's like
and it's just
rinse and repeat here.
Yeah, and it's going to keep happening as long as we have untrained users not doing things properly, but also you end up with security policies where the security part gets lax, and in order to make it easier to use for the users, and then
it's a combination of things too, because they probably fall behind on patches. Maybe they're running a version of some desktop app that has vulnerabilities. It's everything that compounds on top of each other to make these guys just vulnerable to this. But
the higher they connect the security, it hurts usability, and then you get users complaining, and so you have to turn it back. And then this stuff happens, and you're like, well, I tried to tell you, and they're like, yeah, but.
That's true. All right, the next story on the roundup reminds me of something right out of that movie Minority Report. The FBI is working on nationwide facial recognition service, and they plan to launch this. The FBI plans to launch this in mid-January, activate it nationally, and it's going to be a service they'll offer to select states that allow police to identify unknown subject in photos. They're going to use like this database where all the different agencies can plug in a photo of somebody, and like you see on the crime dramas where the computer's going to sit there and flip through faces and match up different features of the face. That's what this is going to do. It's actually really happening.
Right, because there's a lot of these that exist, but they're all fragmented, right? Each state has their own, and this one would be a centrally managed one that would have data on everybody.
And the bigger part of that is it's going to aggregate the data, right? So before, the state of California would have its database and the state of Washington have their database, but they didn't link up. And now the FBI is going to be able to, once they deploy this, it just sort of self-feeds itself.
Right, and one of the questions is, what's the threshold for getting your face put into this thing?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard of like cameras at sporting events that were doing facial recognition as people entered the stadium.
Right.
Oh,
well, that's comparing to the database. But I mean, what gets you added to the database so that you can be found?
I would think anything. I mean, it seems like if they, I don't know. That's a good question. Like, what qualifies?
Do you actually have to be convicted of a crime to be put in this database, or are they going to, eventually just when they take your driver's license photo, they're just going to add your face and identity to the database?
Well, luckily, my state of Washington is going to be one of the first, along with Michigan, Florida, and North Carolina, to participate in the test. So maybe I'll get some first-on-hand experience. What I'll do is I'll let this beard grow out real big, and then I'll get in their database with this massive beard, and then I'll shave it off, and then they'll never catch me.
But facial recognition measures like how far apart your eyes are.
Alan,
and
we need to come up with a system so like if I scratch my nose, then you just need to let me go with it so I can sleep at night. So like that way you don't scare me, because I need to sleep at night. And so this, if you see me going like this, Alan, it's not a nervous twitch. It's saying let me have my fake reality.
All right.
All right. The next story on the news docket, I'm a little mixed on it. It's one of these things where I wasn't sure if it was legit or if it was just rehashing a news story, but I think it's new, and it's passwords of 93,000 politicians, reporters, and bloggers were leaked online. This is a report coming out of Sweden. This has got to be like one of the largest scale breaches I think we've heard of in a while. And I haven't wrapped my brain around exactly who has been impacted by this, but it's like politicians and anchors of newscasts, and I mean, it's like big names here.
Yeah, so did we know where the source of the leak was?
No, that's why I stuck in the roundup, because I didn't think we had enough meat to really dig into it, but it sounded like the news was being broken out of Sweden, so maybe from there, I'm not sure. But 93,000 rows of email and password combinations that don't look like they were hashed have been released.
Yep.
Wow. The complete dump was posted a full month ago. And then,
and again, people were using their passwords, especially if they use the same password on this list as they use for their email. And then you compromise their email. And then even if they use a different password for their Twitter, you can reset their Twitter password once you have their email.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, use a really strong and really different password for your email.
That's important. That's important. All right, so a follow-up story that we talked about last week, a new Stuxnet companion out there that was one of those sit-and waiters, has actually gotten some helpful hand from Bitdefender to help people remove it. This is good, right?
Yes. Yes. Now, this thing wasn't really in the wild because again, it's not designed to spread.
The Dooku rootkit thing.
Yeah. But it is a fairly sophisticated rootkit, and so, having a tool to remove it is useful. But at the same time, if your machine gets rootkitted, never trust it again. You don't remove a rootkit.
I know, right?
Build the system from scratch.
The whole point of an operating system, the whole point of a rootkit is the operating system isn't able to discern if it's there or not. So there's not really a tool you can use to remove it, because at a certain level, any application you run has to interact with the operating system in the same method and means that everything else does. And so if it can fool the operating system's own tools, it can also fool an application. Unless the application goes outside the standard methods, in that case, all the author has to do is adjust their code and they're safe again.
But because, what a lot of rootkits will do will interfere with how the operating system looks at the hard drive.
Yeah.
And actually make the files not appear in a directory listing.
Right.
And if the file doesn't look like it's there, then you can't delete it.
All right. Let's move on to the last story on the roundup. This one puts Anonymous right back into that gray area they seem to find themselves in quite often. Anonymous has attacked child porn websites and then published the usernames of the porn website. This is pretty major. So this is kind of what I referred to earlier when I said hacktivism. This is obviously them going after not just corporations, not just politicians, not just Fox News, but child porn. I don't think I have a problem with this. I, once again, am finding myself in the position with Anonymous, kind of agreeing with them. That kind of makes me feel like a bad guy a little bit.
A little bit. It's more, like we said before, they're not necessarily doing anything, or they're not necessarily being wrong, but
they're breaking the law, but they're not necessarily being morally wrong.
They're being vigilantes, right? It's not so much that now hacking child porn websites and shutting them down is fine with me, but it's just what exactly they do with some of the information. Just they have to be responsible with it, because if they misidentify someone, right? If you're signing up, if you're one of these people that's into child porn, you're not necessarily going to use your real name. Use the name of your neighbor or something, and if somebody gets like a lynched mob over something like this, and it turns out they weren't guilty and it was Anonymous's fault that they got killed or something,
that could be
ridiculous like that. That could be an issue.
That's my concern.
Like, this is not so much with this one, but with the previous Anonymous ones where they were leaking, like the identity of police officers who had done something.
Is this the police knocking on your door right now? I think I hear them. Mr. Jude, we want in. Your neighbor says you've been using porn.
It's the plot.
I just thought as an interest. The story is in the show notes if you guys want to read it. It is kind of an interesting story arc to it, and they also posted a video about it. Anonymous did. If you want to catch that and watch that, the links to all of that. Alan, is there anything else we want to cover in this episode?
No, I think we're done.
Oh, smokes, man. That was a big episode. Now, you can join it live just like our awesome chat room did right here. I'm always reading the comments from people in here talking about the different stories as we go, and we invite you to join us live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is what time Eastern, Alan?
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom! You nailed it at jblive.tv.
I was actually listening this time. Last time I was slightly confused of what did he say? It's like, time.
What? No, what? So the jblive.tv is where we stream all of our productions live, and you can tune in and catch all of them. We also have the IRC embedded right there on the page, so you don't have to worry about it too much. You can jump right in, but you can also load up your own IRC client. There's also the audio stream, right, Alan? You want to tell people about that?
jblive.am allows you to listen on your mobile device or even on your computer, but it's especially great if you're listening at work where you can't be watching video, or if you're on your commute.
Yeah, it's like I tried to strike that balance between low bitrate so it works on 3G but still high fidelity. So like if you have it plugged in to your car stereo like through a headphone jack and then you get full quality sound. I didn't want it to sound like butt, so it's good quality sound, but it should be 3G streamable and not break your overall 3G limit. That was the goal, at least.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.